Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into, well, a really interesting stage of learning English. Hitting that C1 level in listening and speaking.
Right. It's a fascinating point.
It is. I think of it like, okay, you've built a house, the structure's solid, the rooms are there, but now the real work begins, actually learning to live in it, comfortably, confidently.
That's a really good way to put it because, yes, C1 isn't about the basics anymore. You're past core grammar. Your vocabulary is probably pretty good.
So the challenge shifts.
Totally. It becomes much more about navigating subtleties, understanding all the different accents, dealing with just how fast and spontaneous real speech can be, and handling complex ideas.
Yeah, and this is where we hear about that C1 plateau, right? That feeling of, okay, I'm good, but I'm not really improving much anymore.
Exactly. It can feel like you're, well, stuck.
So what we want to do in this deep dive, drawing on all the great material you shared with us, is offer some real strategies.
Strategies to push past that plateau. We'll focus on two main things. First, really honing that advanced listening comprehension.
Right.
And second, boosting your speaking fluency so you sound and feel truly sophisticated and natural.
Great. Let's unpack the listening part first. C1 listening. It's obviously more than just getting the gist. What are we really talking about here?
It's about digging deeper, definitely. It's about catching the implications, understanding tone, sarcasm, that's a big one.
Ah, yes. Always tricky.
And crucially, understanding what's not being said directly but is, implied. The expectation really is you can follow abstract concepts pretty easily. You can figure out a speaker's attitude, their underlying feeling, and you can keep up with complex arguments even if they're speaking fast or maybe have an accent you're not used to.
Okay. I know from my own language learning attempts, there are always hurdles. What are some really common ones people face with C1 listening specifically?
Well, one of the absolute classics is what I call the panic on a word problem. You're listening along, everything's fine, then boom, one word you don't know, and your brain just freezes out.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
You stop listening to everything
Yeah,
else.
exactly. You're so busy trying to decode that one word, the rest of the conversation just washes over you, and you've completely lost the thread. It's super common.
So frustrating.
It really is. And another related issue is passive listening. Having English on in the background, a podcast, the TV, it's better than silence, maybe.
Sure.
But for C1, just letting it be background noise, it's not enough for the deep comprehension you need. You really need active, focused engagement.
Right. So, okay, our brains are naturally good pattern spotters, but you're saying for C1 listening, we need to, consciously train them for specific things.
Precisely. You need to train your brain to anticipate what might come next based on the context, to actively connect the dots between different ideas, and to use the surrounding language, the tone, the situation, to kind of fill in the gaps intuitively if you miss something. It's about developing a more predictive, sophisticated ear.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's make this concrete. Tell me about Kenji. His story about listening seems to pop up a lot in the material we looked at.
Kenji, yeah, he's a perfect case study. Software engineer from Japan, moved to London for a job. Now, on paper, his English was fantastic. He aced formal C1 exams.
Okay.
But the reality, day-to-day life in a busy London office, that was a whole different ballgame.
Oh, I can just imagine. The sheer noise, overlapping voices, all sorts of different British accents maybe he hadn't encountered before. That really fast, informal chat.
He said it was exactly like that, overwhelming. He described it as understanding the individual words maybe, but the whole sentence just wouldn't click in real time.
Or getting the sentence, but missing the gem.
Yes, or the sarcasm. He shared this great example. A colleague said something like, "Oh, that's a bit rich," meaning, that's ironic coming from you.
Right.
But Kenji just heard rich and thought they were talking about money or maybe something being expensive. He completely missed the irony.
Easily done. That subtext is everything at this level. So what changed for him? What was the turning point?
He had a British mentor who gave him this piece of advice that Kenji called ridiculously simple but life-changing.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
The mentor basically said, "Kenji, stop trying so hard to catch every single word. You're missing the big picture. Try listening for the melody of the conversation."
The melody. I like that. What does that mean practically, though?
It means focusing less on individual words and more on the overall flow, the rhythm, the intonation. What's the main idea? What's the feeling behind the words? Even watching people's faces, their expressions.
Shifting from just decoding words to understanding the whole communication package.
Exactly that.
Brilliant. So how did Kenji actually implement this listen for the melody idea? What did he do?
He got really deliberate about it. He started downloading podcasts, radio shows, specifically seeking out diverse British accents, Mancunian, Scottish, Cockney, even if he only understood parts at first.
Just exposing himself to the sounds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he tuned into BBC radio dramas, watched those really nuanced British comedies, like The Office or Peep Show.
Oh, yeah, where half the meaning is unspoken and the awkwardness.
Precisely. He'd watch with English subtitles first, get the gist, then watch again without any subs, forcing his ear to do the heavy lifting.
Smart.
He also paid close attention to intonation patterns and started learning phrasal verbs and idioms, but in context, seeing how they were actually used, not just memorizing lists. And importantly, he tuned into discourse markers.
You mean words like, however, mind you, so basically.
That's right. Things like, mind you. Having said that, to cut a long story short, he realized they act like little signposts, signaling where the speaker's thought is going next, how ideas connect or shift.
Got it, like verbal road signs guiding you through the talk.
Precisely. He trained himself to listen for those cues.
And what happened? What was the result of all this focused work?
He said that within about 6 months or so, his listening really transformed. He wasn't just decoding words anymore. He was actually processing the meaning, the implications in real time.
Wow.
He could follow group chats, he caught the humor, the sarcasm, and because he understood better, he felt way more confident actually jumping into conversations himself. His story really shows how C1 listening is about tuning into that whole intricate dance of communication.
That's a fantastic outcome. So, okay, for listeners wanting to achieve that level, what are some specific actionable techniques they can use based on the sources?
Okay, several key techniques came up. First, practice selective attention and prediction. So instead of desperately trying to catch every single sound, train your brain to lock onto keywords, infer the speaker's intention, and actively try to predict, what might come next based on where the conversation is going.
So being an active participant mentally, not just a receiver.
Exactly. Second, get good at contextual inference. If you hit an unfamiliar word, don't freeze up. Use the words around it, the tone, the topic. Make an educated guess. Be a sort of language detective.
I like that. Using the clues.
Yeah. And mental summarization is another good one. As someone's talking, quickly try to rephrase their main points in your own head, like a quick mental check. Okay, so they're saying X because of Y. If you can't do that, you might be missing something important.
Forces you to process, not just hear.
Right. And like Kenji found, pay real attention to discourse markers and signposting words. Learn what things like, on the other hand, or consequently, or to sum up, actually signal about the structure of the talk.
Those little guides.
They really are guides. And finally, maybe the most subtle, actively listen for tone, emotion, and implication. How something is said, the pitch changes, the stress, the speed often carries as much or even more meaning than the words themselves. You have to dig beneath the surface.
Okay, great techniques. What about the actual material? The sources, stress, variety. What kind of stuff should people be listening to?
Variety is absolutely key, and ideally, it's stuff you're genuinely interested in. If you love science, find advanced science podcasts in English, into history, look for those documentaries. Think beyond just language learning material.
Right.
Some examples that came up were shows like NPR's Up First, BBC Radio 4's In Our Time, The Daily, Stuff You Should Know, Freakonomics Radio. You get that mix of topics, different speakers, different formats. That's crucial.
And things like TV shows, documentaries.
Oh, definitely essential. Advanced documentaries, like, say, Our Planet or Planet Earth, they use complex language. And sophisticated dramas, The Crown, Succession, Sherlock, The Dialogue, is just so rich with nuance and subtlety. And that tactic we mentioned, watch with English subtitles first, then watch again without. It really helps build comprehension and confidence.
Good tip. What about just audio, like audiobooks or lectures?
Highly recommended, especially for training your ear to follow longer, complex arguments. Challenging audiobooks, university lectures, you can find loads online now from places like Coursera or edX TED Talks. They all push you to sustain focus.
And the accent challenge. There are so many accents in English.
You just have to embrace it at C1. You have to actively seek out content from different English-speaking places. Australia, Ireland, Scotland, Canada, New Zealand, different US regions, different UK regions.
Where do you find all that?
Honestly, YouTube is a goldmine for this. Just search for speakers from specific regions. Even try watching foreign films you know well, but with the English dub turned on sometimes. Just immerse yourself in the global sound of English.
Okay, so wide immersion. What about more focused, active practice, like specific exercises?
Yes, the sources highlighted a few really powerful, though demanding ones. Transcription drills came up a lot.
Explain that.
You take a short audio clip, maybe 30 seconds, a minute tops from something challenging. You listen again and again and again and try to write down absolutely everything you hear. Every word, every contraction, every
Wow, that sounds intense. What's the benefit?
It forces your ear to become incredibly sensitive to individual sounds, how words blend together in connected speech, those little things you usually miss. Comparing it to a transcript afterwards, if you can find one, is incredibly revealing.
I can imagine.
Then there's advanced shadowing. You listen to a native speaker, and you repeat what they say almost immediately, trying to mimic everything, their pronunciation, rhythm, intonations, speed, the whole music of their speech.
Not just the words, but the sound.
Exactly. Start with short phrases. It's harder than it sounds. And dictation is also useful, just writing down exactly what you hear from an audio source. It tests your accuracy and your auditory memory.
So transcription for fine details, shadowing for flow, dictation for accuracy.
Kind of, yeah. They work different muscles.
Any tech help mentioned?
Language exchange apps that have voice messaging like Hello Talk or Tandem can be really good. Someone sends you a voice message, you have to listen carefully to get it, then you record your reply.
So it forces active listening in a real context.
Exactly, and it links directly to speaking practice too. It's a nice little loop.
Great practical idea. Now, we heard about Kenji mastering general listening. What about listening in a very specific technical field? You mentioned Dr. Sofia Rodriguez.
Ah, yes, Dr. Rodriguez. Cardiologist from Brazil. Excellent English overall, like Kenji. But she went to a big international medical conference and felt completely, well, her word was adrift during the discussions.
Really?
Yeah.
Even with good English, what was the issue there?
It wasn't just the complex medical terms she realized. It was more about the rapid-fire abbreviations everyone used, the field-specific metaphors, and just how quickly they jumped between related topics without always explicitly signaling the connection.
The insider shorthand.
Exactly. She felt like she was always one step behind, just trying to catch up.
So how did she tackle that very specific listening challenge?
She decided she needed targeted immersion. So she started seeking out English medical content, specifically podcasts on clinical reviews, recordings of surgical case discussions, things like that. Initially, she said she was hitting pause all the time, looking up terms that panic on a word thing again.
Right. Been there.
But then she changed her approach. She started listening to whole episodes, whole presentations, without stopping constantly. She had to accept she wouldn't catch every single technical term right away. Her main goal shifted.
To what?
To understanding the overall flow of the discussion. What's the main problem they're talking about? What solutions or findings are being presented? What's the bottom line, the conclusion?
Focusing on the bigger picture, not getting bogged down in every detail. That sounds much more manageable.
It was. She also started watching recordings of conference talks and hospital those big case presentations. And she paid really close attention to how the English-speaking doctors structured their talks, how they presented data, how they handled Q&A sessions. She noticed they used recurring phrases, sort of formulas.
Like what?
Things like, our data indicates that. Or, for disagreeing politely, maybe, while I appreciate that point, I wonder. Or for wrapping up, in essence. These became like anchors for her.
Signal phrases specific to that medical communication style.
Exactly. So by focusing on those discourse patterns and accepting she could infer a lot of technical terms from context, her listening in her specific field improved massively. She called it getting attuned to the symphony of medical English.
I love that phrase.
Yeah. And the result was, at the next conference, she wasn't just passively following along. She felt confident enough to actually jump into the Q&A, ask her own questions, offer her own points. Her listening unlocked her professional voice.
That's fantastic. It really shows C1 isn't just one thing. It's about mastering the specific communication landscape you operate in. Okay, let's pivot then. Let's talk about C1 speaking. What does that look like beyond just basic communication?
Right. C1 speaking is definitely way more than just getting your message across. It's about expressing yourself, fluently, coherently, and importantly, appropriately in all sorts of different situations.
Mhm.
The focus really shifts to sounding natural, using idioms and colloquial language correctly, adapting how you speak for different people or contexts without really thinking about it.
And handling complex stuff.
Yeah, you're expected to be able to discuss complex ideas in depth, hold your own in extended discussions, argue persuasively, and do it all with a certain level of sophistication.
Okay. But even at this advanced stage, people still get stuck with speaking, don't they?
Yeah.
What are the common sticking points here?
Oh, absolutely. Several came up repeatedly in the sources. One big one is overthinking grammar while you're speaking.
Ah, the internal editor working overtime.
Exactly. It leads to these unnatural pauses and hesitations, makes you sound stilted. Another is relying on the same familiar vocabulary and sentence structures, even when you actually know more complex words or ways to phrase things passively.
Right, that gap between passive knowledge and active use.
Precisely. Then there's the difficulty with spontaneity, that feeling when someone asks you something unexpected and your mind just goes completely blank.
The classic deer at headlights moment.
Totally. And we can't forget fossilized errors.
Yeah.
Those mistakes, maybe in pronunciation or grammar that you've been making for so long, they've just become ingrained habits, even though you're otherwise very advanced.
Hard to shake those off.
Very. And honestly, a huge barrier for many is simply the fear of making mistakes. It holds people back, makes them afraid to experiment with new language, makes them sound less fluent than they could be. That fear factor at C1 is very real.
It really is. And it feels impossible to talk about C1 speaking without bringing back that connection to listening we discussed. Like they're so linked.
Fundamentally linked, especially at this level. All that deep, active listening you do, that's the input. That's what feeds your brain the natural patterns, the complex vocabulary, the correct pronunciation, the way idioms are really used. You can't really produce what you haven't first absorbed. Input genuinely fuels output.
That's such a key takeaway. Input fuels output. Okay, tell me about Anya. Her story seems to really tackle that spontaneity challenge head on.
Anya's a great example. She was a German philosophy student. Academically, her English was incredible, reading dense texts, writing complex essays, no problem. She could manage conversations okay, especially she had some time to prepare.
Right.
But she really wanted to join the university's English Debate Society, and the thought terrified her.
Because debating is the ultimate spontaneous speaking test, right? Fast, unpredictable.
Exactly what she felt. She said something like, in a debate, you just can't translate in your head. You can't plan out perfect sentences. You have to react now, challenge, defend, counter-argue instantly. Her mind just froze at first.
What did that look like?
Her first attempts were, well, rough. She knew the ideas, knew the words, but couldn't get them out smoothly. Maybe grammatically okay, but the rhythm was off. Ideas didn't connect well. Lots of hesitation. Just didn't flow.
So how did she break through that? How did she find her spontaneous voice?
A professor gave her some really crucial advice. He said basically, Anya, your logic is sharp in English. You get the arguments. Now you need the language itself to feel automatic, to flow naturally. Stop aiming for perfectly correct sentences in the heat of the moment. Aim for effective arguments, and the best way to get there, start thinking in English.
Ah, start thinking in English. That sounds simple, but how do you actually do that? It feels like a huge mental shift.
She made it a very deliberate practice, like training a muscle. Instead of thinking in German, then translating, she forced herself to, well, narrate her day internally in English, argue with news headlines in her head in English, plan imaginary conversations, draft emails mentally, all in English.
Wow.
And specifically for debates, instead of writing out full speeches, she started using mind maps, just keywords and core phrases in English. That forced her to generate the connecting language and sentence structures on the spot.
That mind map idea is clever. It bypasses the urge to write a script.
Exactly. It forces spontaneity. She also joined Toastmasters, specifically for their table topics section.
Oh yeah, where they give you a random topic.
Right. A random question. You have to talk about it for a minute or two, completely unprepared.
Terrifying.
She said it was at first, but also incredibly freeing. She learned to use filler words, naturally, strategically, to buy thinking time, just like native speakers do. She got better at paraphrasing when she couldn't grab the perfect word instantly, used phrases like, that's an interesting question, to give herself a moment. And she really focused on using linking words, therefore, however, in addition, to make sure her spontaneous points still had logical flow.
So what happened? Did it work?
It did. Slowly but surely, her whole internal process changed. That friction of mental translation started to fade. Her responses in debates got much quicker, more sophisticated, and sounded way more confident and natural. She found she could actually express her complex ideas spontaneously, not just correctly if given time. Getting into that debate society really came down to that internal shift, thinking and speaking on the fly, letting go of prepackaged perfection.
Anya's story really drives home that C1 is often about that internal change, thinking in the language. So pulling from all this, what are some concrete speaking strategies listeners can use to build that fluency and spontaneity?
Okay, for fluency and coherence. First, that thinking in English habit. Make it deliberate. Second, when you have to speak impromptu or give a presentation, try using mind maps or bullet points, not full scripts. It forces you to generate language. Third, really master discourse markers and cohesive devices. Use them actively for smooth, logical flow. Fourth, practice paraphrasing and circumlocution, talking around a word you can't find. It's a vital skill and surprisingly useful. Storytelling practice. Tell anecdotes, summarize things. It pushes you to use descriptive words and vary your sentences, making you sound less robotic.
Right, all things that make speech sound more alive. What about actively boosting vocabulary and grammar range when speaking?
Crucial for C1. Don't just recognize advanced words and idioms. Actively use them. Deploy them. Consciously try to vary your sentence structures. Mix simple and complex. Don't get stuck in a rut. Experiment with more complex forms, inversions, conditionals, passive voice where they fit naturally. Get comfortable with common phrasal verbs and collocations, those word pairs that just sound right. And like with listening, recycle language. Hear a good phrase a native speaker uses, note it down, try it out yourself, turn that passive knowledge active.
It keeps coming back to making passive knowledge active. Okay, and pronunciation, intonation, how important are they for speaking?
Oh, hugely important. Critical for how you come across, how easily you're understood. Really focus on English rhythm and stress. It's a stress-timed language, which is different from many others. And getting that rhythm right is key to sounding natural. Understand and practice connected speech, how words link and change in fast speech. Use intonation deliberately to convey meaning, emotion, emphasis. And this is tough but vital. Record yourself speaking.
Oof, listening back to yourself.
I know, it takes courage, but it's invaluable. Listen critically. Where do you hesitate? What sounds awkward or unclear? And don't be afraid to ask trusted native speakers or teachers for specific feedback on your pronunciation and intonation. That feedback loop, self-correction, and external input is vital.
And the absolute baseline requirement.
Practice. It's non-negotiable. You simply have to find and create opportunities to speak. Talk with native speakers, other advanced learners, join discussion groups, debate clubs, language exchanges, practice arguing, role-play different scenarios, explain concepts out loud, summarize articles. It's simple. The more you speak, the better you get.
The core truth, really. Do you have one more story, maybe one that touches on confidence or authenticity in speaking?
Yes, let's talk about Taibo, an entrepreneur from South Africa living in London. Excellent written English, really smart business-wise, but naturally quite shy and very self-conscious about his accent. He worried it made him sound unprofessional or hard to understand. Networking events were, for him, torture.
Oh, I can absolutely see how that self-consciousness, especially about accent, could just shut you down in a networking situation.
It can be a total killer for spontaneous conversation and connection. Taiba's turning point came after one really bad networking night. He felt he'd just completely failed to connect. A mentor gave him some really powerful advice.
What was it?
The mentor said something like, Taibo, your ideas are excellent. Your accent, it's part of you. It's unique. It's actually a strength, not a weakness. People connect with real people, not perfect speaking robots. Stop trying to sound like someone else. Focus on showing your genuine interest in others, sharing your great ideas authentically, even if it's not perfect.
Wow. That completely reframes it. From sound perfect to be real and connect. That must have been liberating.
He said it was. He made a conscious shift. His goal changed from pronunciation perfection to simply making authentic connections. He started really listening to how his colleagues did small talk, the natural phrases, the rhythm, not stuff from a textbook. He recorded himself pitching his business, yeah, but listened not just for errors, but for where he sounded stiff, unnatural, where his personality wasn't coming through. He worked on varying his intonation to sound more engaged, more curious.
So deliberately practicing projecting his authentic self.
Exactly. And he pushed himself out of his comfort zone, joined an entrepreneurs group, went to industry meetups, volunteered somewhere, places he had to talk to new people. He'd set small goals. Start 3 conversations tonight. Doesn't matter how nervous I am. And crucially, in those chats, his main focus became listening well, asking good follow-up questions, sharing relevant things about himself, accepting the words might not be perfectly polished.
And what was the result of that shift in focus?
His confidence grew enormously. He realized that while clarity obviously matters, chasing some impossible ideal of perfection was actually preventing him from connecting. And paradoxically, his fluency improved massively just by having more real, lower-stakes conversations focused on connection, not perfection. His accent just became part of his professional persona. People responded really well to his genuine interest and his strong ideas. Taibo's story really shows that C1 speaking ultimately is about finding your authentic voice and using it to genuinely connect.
These stories, Kenji, overcoming the listening barriers. Sophia mastering her field-specific language. Anya finding that spontaneous voice. Taibo learning to connect authentically. They paint such a vivid picture of what C1 mastery really looks like.
And they really highlight how listening and speaking aren't separate skills you work on in isolation at this level.
Not at all. They're so deeply intertwined, aren't they? They constantly feed each other. All that active, deliberate listening we talked about, absorbing the patterns, the vocabulary, the pronunciation, the idioms, that's the essential input, the fuel for your speaking.
And the other way around, too. When you actively try to speak to produce complex, natural-sounding language, it makes you so much more attuned to the nuances when you listen. It sharpens your ear.
It's a powerful, positive feedback loop. A virtuous cycle, really.
Yes, exactly. Think of every conversation as a real-time feedback opportunity. You speak, you see the reaction, you hear the response, there's more input right there. That back and forth is absolute gold for figuring out where your gaps are.
Right.
Maybe you keep missing things when people with a certain accent speak okay. That's a listening target. Maybe you struggle to explain a concept clearly okay. That shows a vocabulary or structure gap you need to work on for speaking.
So the advice is to consciously lean into that synergy.
Yeah.
When listening, how would I phrase that? When speaking, really listen to the responses.
Precisely. It's this continuous cycle. Input, output, reflection, refinement. Now, getting to C1 is amazing, but hitting those plateaus we mentioned is super common. Progress can feel incredibly slow. What advice did the sources offer for dealing with that?
Yeah, plateaus are normal. The key seems to be don't get passive, stay proactive. Set small, specific, achievable goals. Micro goals, like this week I'll listen to 1 podcast with an Irish accent, or this month I'll try to use these 5 new phrasal verbs in conversations.
Breaking it down into manageable chunks.
Exactly. And celebrate those small wins.
Yeah.
Acknowledge the progress, however small it feels. And, this is big, change how you think about mistakes. They're not failures, they're data. Figure out why it happened, learn from it. Don't beat yourself up. And if your routine gets stale, mix it up. Find new material, try a different practice method, talk to different people.
Keep it fresh.
Keep it fresh. And maybe the most important thing, reconnect with your why. Why are you putting in all this effort? What's your ultimate goal for having this high level of English? That purpose is your best fuel when things feel tough.
That's all really solid, practical advice for staying motivated and moving forward.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, the big picture is that mastering C1, listening and speaking is, well, it's more than just language skill. It's really about unlocking your full voice in English. It's about having the confidence to connect deeply with people and ideas, to navigate complex conversations smoothly, to express your own complex thoughts clearly, and to understand those subtle, unspoken layers that make communication so rich. It's moving beyond just transmitting information.
To truly engaging, understanding, and being understood authentically.
Exactly. And that journey, it definitely takes ongoing immersion, consistent, deliberate practice, and yeah, a willingness to keep pushing your comfort zone again and again.
But as the stories of Kenji, Sophia, Anya, and Taibo show, with the right strategies, dedication, and crucially the right mindset, you absolutely can take your English listening and speaking to truly impressive levels.
Ultimately, reaching this level is about empowering yourself, allowing your unique perspective, your unique voice, to be heard and understood, and to make the impact you want to make anywhere in the world. Something to maybe mull over as you continue on your own English journey. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into, well, that really fascinating stage of mastering English, hitting the C1 level in listening and speaking. It's kind of like, you've built the house, the structure's solid, the rooms are all there.
Right.
But now the real challenge is figuring out how to actually live in it, comfortably, confidently. And this deep dive is built right from a great collection of insights and experiences you've shared with us, looking at what that C1 mastery really means.
That's a perfect way to put it because, yeah, at C1, you're generally past worrying about the core grammar or like basic vocab lists. You've got that foundation.
Right.
But the game totally shifts.
Yeah.
Now it's about navigating all the subtleties, understanding this huge range of accents you encounter,
Oh, yeah.
dealing with how unpredictable real spontaneous speech is, and really grappling with complex, sometimes abstract ideas.
And this is often where you hear people talk about hitting that C1 plateau, isn't it?
Definitely.
You feel like you're good, you really are, but maybe just not making those huge leaps you saw earlier on.
Absolutely. It can feel like you're just sort of stuck spinning your wheels.
Yeah.
So our goal here, pulling from your material, is to offer some real, concrete strategies to push past that feeling. We're focusing on two main things. First, how to really sharpen up that advanced listening comprehension.
Okay.
And second, how to boost your speaking fluency so you sound and feel genuinely natural and sophisticated.
Okay, let's dig into that. So C1 listening, it's clearly more than just like getting the gist of what someone said. What are we really aiming for?
It's about getting beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Picking up on what's implied, not just stated, understanding the speaker's tone, catching sarcasm, which, let's be honest, can be really tricky.
Oh, tell me about it.
And, crucially, understanding what's not being said explicitly, but what's strongly hinted at. The expectation, really, is that you can follow abstract concepts pretty easily, figure out a speaker's attitude or feeling about something, and keep up with complicated arguments, even if the person's talking fast or has an accent you're not, immediately used to.
I know from my own attempts diving into other languages, there are always stumbling blocks. What are some common hurdles people run into specifically at this C1 listening stage?
One of the absolute classics is what you might call the panic on a word problem. You're listening along, doing fine, and bam, you hit one word you don't know. Your brain just freezes on it, trying to decode it.
Yep.
And while you're stuck on that one little word, the whole conversation just zooms past you, and you've completely lost the thread.
Oh, I've so been there. Your brain just locks up. It's incredibly frustrating.
It happens to pretty much everyone. And another one, kind of related, is passive listening. You might have English podcasts on or the TV humming in the background.
Sure, better than nothing.
Maybe. But at C1, that kind of background noise just isn't enough for deep comprehension.
Yeah.
You really need active, focused engagement to train your ear properly at this level.
Right. So our brains are amazing pattern spotters naturally, but you're saying for C1 listening, we need to sort of consciously test in them for specific things?
Exactly. You need to train them for those advanced skills. Anticipating what might come next based on the context, actively connecting the dots between different ideas, using the surrounding language and the whole situation to make educated guesses, fill in the gaps intuitively. It's about developing a more sophisticated, predictive kind of listening.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's make this concrete. Tell me about Kenji. His story about C1 listening seems really relevant here based on the materials.
Kenji's a fantastic example. He's a software engineer, originally from Japan, moved to London for a job. Now, on paper, his English was brilliant. Passed formal C1 tests, no problem.
Okay.
But the reality of a busy, fast-paced London office, that was a whole different beast.
I can just picture it. Noise, maybe lots of different British accents he wasn't used to, that rapid-fire, overlapping, informal chat. Must have been pretty overwhelming.
He said it absolutely was. He
Yeah.
described it as, like, understanding the individual words okay, but somehow not grasping the meaning of the whole sentence in the moment.
Yeah.
Or maybe he'd get the literal sentence, but completely miss the joke or the sarcasm. He shared this specific example. Like a colleague said something like, oh, that's a bit rich, meaning, that's ironic coming from you.
Right.
But Kenji just heard rich and thought they were talking about money or how expensive something was. Completely missed the nuance.
Oh yeah, I've definitely made blunders like that.
Yeah.
That subtext is just so crucial at this level. So what was the breakthrough for Kenji? What changed?
He had a British mentor who gave him what he called some ridiculously simple but totally life-changing advice. This mentor told him, Kenji, stop trying so hard to catch every single word. You're like missing the forest for the trees. Try listening for the melody of the conversation instead.
The melody, I love that. What does that actually mean, though, in practice?
It means tuning into the overall flow, the rhythm, the intonation, the main idea, the feeling the speaker's putting across, even watching their facial expressions. It's about shifting your focus away from just decoding word by word and instead tuning into the whole communication picture.
That's brilliant advice. So how did Kenji actually put this listen for the melody idea into action? What did he do?
He got really, really deliberate about it. He started actively seeking out and downloading podcasts and radio shows, specifically featuring different British regional accents, Mancunian, Scottish, Cockney, you name it, even if he only caught bits and pieces at first.
Okay, so targeted exposure.
Exactly. He tuned into BBC radio dramas, watched those really nuanced British comedies like The Office or Peep Show.
Yes, where half the meaning is in the awkward pauses and the delivery.
Precisely. He'd watch them with English subtitles first to get the gist, but then, this is key, he'd watch the same episodes again without any subtitles, really forcing his ear to do the heavy lifting.
Makes sense.
He also started really focusing on intonation patterns, how pitch and stress change meaning, and learning common phrasal verbs and idioms, but crucially in context, not just memorizing lists. And he consciously started paying attention to those little signpost words, discourse markers like, mind you, having said that, anyway, to cut a long story short.
The little words that signal where the speaker's heading or how their thought is structured, like verbal punctuation.
Exactly right. They act like road signs, guiding you through the flow of the argument or the story. He trained himself to recognize and use those signals.
And what happened? What was the result of all this focused effort?
Within about 6 months, maybe a bit more, he said his listening was genuinely transformed. He wasn't just painstakingly decoding words anymore. He was actually processing the meaning in real time. He could follow fast group chats. He started picking up on the implied meanings, the humor.
Wow.
And as a result, he felt much more confident actually jumping into conversations himself. His story really drives home that C1 listening is about tuning into that whole intricate dance of communication, not just the steps.
That's a really powerful illustration. Okay, so for anyone listening right now who wants to develop that kind of advanced listening, what are some specific actionable techniques they can start using based on the sources we looked at?
Okay, several key ones really stand out. First, deliberately practice selective attention and prediction. So instead of trying to grasp every single sound wave hitting your ear,
Which is impossible.
totally impossible,
Yeah.
train your brain to focus on the keywords, the speaker's likely intention, and actively try to predict what might come next based on the context you have so far.
So you're not just passively receiving information, you're leaning forward, mentally anticipating.
Exactly. Second, get good at contextual inference. If you hit an unfamiliar word, the absolute worst thing you can do is panic and stop listening.
Right, the panic on a word thing again.
Exactly. Instead, use the surrounding words, use the speaker's tone, use the overall topic, use all the clues to make an educated guess about the meaning. Be a language detective.
I like that, thinking like a detective, gathering clues.
And something surprisingly effective is mental summarization. As someone's talking, maybe at the end of a point they make, quickly try to rephrase their main points in your own head, like a quick check. Okay, so basically, they're arguing X because of Y. If you can't do that simple check, you've probably missed something important.
That forces you to actually process the meaning, not just let the words wash over you.
Right. And as Kenji found, pay close attention to those discourse markers and signposting words. Really learn what phrases like, on the other hand, or consequently, or to sum up, are signaling about the structure of the information. They really do function like verbal road signs.
Got it. Those little cues that guide the listener through the argument.
Yes. And finally, make a conscious effort to listen for tone, emotion, and implication. At C1, how something is said is often just as important, if not more important, than the literal words used. Changes in pitch, stress, speed, they carry a huge amount of meaning. You really need to dig deeper than just the surface words.
Okay, so beyond the techniques themselves, what kind of material should listeners be immersing themselves in? The sources mentioned variety is crucial.
Absolutely essential. You need diverse exposure and ideally find stuff on topics you're genuinely interested in anyway. If you love science, find advanced science podcasts or lectures in English. If you're into history, seek out detailed history documentaries. Think way beyond just standard language learning materials.
Right.
Examples that came up in the sources include things like NPR's Up First, BBC Radio 4's In Our Time, The Daily Podcast, Stuff You Should Know, Freakonomics Radio. It's that mix of different topics, different speaker styles, different accents, different formats. That's really key.
And what about visual media? TV shows, documentaries?
Oh, definitely essential. Advanced documentaries like, say, Our Planet or Planet Earth often have quite complex vocabulary and sentence structures. And those sophisticated dramas, things like The Crown, Succession, Sherlock, House of Cards, They're full of incredibly nuanced dialogue, subtle interactions, complex plots.
Yeah, lots to unpack there.
A really good tactic people mentioned is watching an episode with English subtitles first, just to get your bearings. Then, watch the same episode again soon after, but without the subtitles, and see how much more you catch the second time around.
That sounds like a good way to build confidence, kind of scaffold the listening.
Yeah.
What about things like audiobooks or lectures?
Highly recommended, especially for training your ear to follow sustained, complex arguments. Listening to challenging audiobooks or university lectures. You can find tons online now from places like Coursera or edX, or even just longer TED Talks. They really push you to maintain focus and follow a complex train of thought over a longer period.
And tackling that huge variety of accents out there, it can feel daunting.
You really have to embrace accent diversity at this level.
Yeah.
There's no avoiding it if you want to function in the real world. So actively seek out content featuring speakers from Australia, Ireland, Scotland, Canada, New Zealand, different regions of the US and the UK. YouTube is an absolute goldmine for this. You could even try watching foreign films, but with English dubs sometimes, just to expose your ear to different vocal qualities and rhythms, even if it feels a bit weird at first. The goal is to immerse yourself in the global sound of English.
Okay, so lots of great ideas for materials to consume. What about more focused, active practice exercises, things you sit down and do?
Yeah, the source has highlighted several demanding but really effective ones. Transcription drills came up a lot.
Okay, what does that involve?
You take a short audio clip, maybe just 30 seconds to a minute, from something challenging news report, a fast podcast segment. Then you listen to it over and over and try to write down everything you hear, every single word, every contraction, every little hesitation sound if you can.
Wow, that sounds incredibly painstaking. What's the real payoff for that level of detail?
It forces your ear to become incredibly attuned to individual sounds, those tricky little contractions that can trip you up, and crucially, connected speech, how words naturally blend together, sounds get dropped or changed. It's brutal, but amazing for fine-tuning your ear. If you can find a transcript to compare your version against afterwards, even better.
Okay, intense but effective. What else?
Advanced shadowing. This is where you listen to a native speaker saying a phrase or sentence, and you immediately repeat it, trying to perfectly mimic everything, their exact pronunciation, the rhythm, the intonation patterns, the speed, the whole music of their speech.
Right.
Start with short phrases. It's harder than it sounds.
So you're not just saying the words, you're trying to actually embody the sound and rhythm.
Exactly. And then there's dictation, which is a bit simpler, just writing down exactly what you hear from an audio source. It's a good test of your overall accuracy and your short-term auditory memory. So transcription for the micro details, shadowing for the flow in music, dictation for general precision.
Got it. Any tech tools that can help with this?
Language exchange apps that have voice messaging, features things like HelloTalk or Tandem, can actually be surprisingly useful for listening practice.
How so?
Well, when someone sends you a voice message, you really have to listen carefully to understand it, right? And then you have to record your reply. So it forces active listening in a real, spontaneous context. And it immediately bridges into speaking practice, too.
That's a great practical tip, using everyday tools. Now, we talked about Kenji mastering general spontaneous listening. What about when you need to master listening in a really specific technical field? The sources mentioned Dr. Sofia Rodriguez.
Ah, yes, Dr. Sofia Rodriguez. Her story is fascinating. She's a cardiologist from Brazil, excellent general English skills overall. But she went to a big international medical conference and felt, as she put it, completely adrift during the specialized discussions.
Really? Even with great English, what was the specific problem?
She realized it wasn't just the complex medical terms themselves, though those were part of it. It was also the rapid-fire abbreviations doctors use all the time in their field, the specific metaphors unique to medicine, and just how quickly they jumped between complex topics without necessarily signposting it clearly for someone slightly outside that immediate circle. She felt like she was constantly 2 steps behind.
Okay, so how did she tackle that really niche, high-stakes listening environment?
She decided she just had to immerse herself specifically in English medical communication. She started actively listening to English language medical podcasts, reading and listening to clinical reviews, watching recordings of surgical case discussions, anything she could find.
Right, targeted immersion again.
Exactly. And at first, she said she was hitting pause constantly, looking up every term she didn't know, falling into that panic on a word trap again.
Totally relatable. It's hard not to.
But she realized that wasn't working. It was too fragmented. So she shifted her tactic. She started forcing herself to listen to whole episodes of presentations without stopping all the time. She had to consciously accept that she wouldn't catch every single technical term immediately. Her new main goal became understanding the overall discussion. Okay, what's the main problem they're talking about? What solutions or approaches are being presented? What's the bottom line, the main conclusion?
That sounds much more manageable, focusing on the big picture, the macro-level understanding, instead of getting lost in every micro detail.
Precisely. She also started watching recordings of conference talks and hospital grand rounds presentations, but paying very close attention to how the English-speaking doctors structured their talks. How do they introduce topics? How do they present data visually and verbally? How do they handle challenging questions from the audience? She noticed they used recurring phrases or sort of formulas again and again.
Ah, like field-specific discourse markers.
Exactly. Things like, our data indicates that.
Mhm.
Or for politely disagreeing, maybe something like, while I appreciate that point, I wonder if we've considered. Or for wrapping up. So in essence, what we're seeing is those became her anchors.
Got it. Those specific recurring phrases helped her navigate.
Yes. By focusing on those discourse patterns and trusting herself to infer the meaning of many technical terms from the context rather than needing to know every single one instantly, her listening comprehension within her specialized field improved dramatically. She described it as finally getting attuned to the symphony of medical English.
I love that phrase.
And the proof was in the pudding. At the next conference she attended, she wasn't just passively following along. She felt confident enough to actually participate in the Q&A sessions, ask her own insightful questions, and even offer her own points of view. Her specialized listening skills really unlocked her full professional engagement.
That's an incredible transformation. It really highlights how C1 isn't just about general fluency, is it? It's often about mastering the specific communication landscape you need to operate in. Okay, let's pivot now. We've covered listening in depth. Let's talk about the other side of the coin. Advanced speaking fluency at C1. What does that really look like beyond just, making yourself understood?
Right. C1 speaking is definitely way beyond just getting your basic message across without major breakdowns. It's about expressing yourself fluently, coherently, and appropriately in a whole range of situations. The focus really shifts towards sounding natural, using idioms and colloquial language correctly, adapting your level of formality seamlessly for different people in different contexts. You're expected to be able to discuss complex ideas in considerable detail, participate effectively in extended discussions, and argue your points persuasively with a degree of sophistication.
Okay. But even at this advanced level, I know people still feel blocked or held back when it comes to speaking. What are the common sticking points that came up in the sources?
Oh, several classic ones. A big one is overthinking grammar while you're actually trying to speak. Consciously monitoring every verb ending.
Yeah, kills the flow.
Totally kills the flow. It leads to these painful hesitations, and this makes you sound really unnatural. Another one is relying on the same limited set of vocabulary and sentence structures, even though passively in your head, you know many more sophisticated words and ways to phrase things.
Right. You have the knowledge stored away, but you can't seem to access it quickly enough when you're speaking.
Exactly. That difficulty with spontaneity is huge. Feeling like your mind just goes completely blank when you're put on the spot and have to speak off the cuff.
The classic deer in the headlights feeling.
That's the one. Totally. And then there are those stubborn fossilized errors, mistakes, maybe in pronunciation or grammar, that you've been making for so long they've just become ingrained habits, even though you're otherwise very advanced.
Those are hard to shake.
They really are. And honestly, maybe the biggest deterrent of all for many people is just the fear of making mistakes. It makes you hesitant, you hold back, you're afraid to try out that new phrasal verb or that complex sentence structure you learned. That fear factor is absolutely real and powerful, even at C1.
It really is. And it feels impossible to talk about C1 speaking without coming back to that crucial listening-speaking connection we touched on earlier, right? They're not separate things.
Fundamentally linked. You absolutely cannot separate them at this level. All that deep, active listening you're doing, that's your fuel. That's the input. It's feeding your brain constantly with the natural patterns, the complex vocabulary, the correct pronunciation, the idiomatic phrases, everything you need to draw on when you speak. You can't realistically produce language consistently and naturally if you haven't absorbed the vast amounts of it first. Your input directly fuels your output. It's that simple.
Such an important reminder. Input fuels output. Okay, so tell me about Anya. Her story seems to speak directly to tackling that challenge of spontaneity in speaking.
Right, Anya. She was a German philosophy student. Academically, her English was phenomenal. Reading complex texts, writing brilliant essays, no problem. She could even hold decent conversations if she had a bit of time to prepare her thoughts. But she desperately wanted to join the university's English Debate Society, and that absolutely terrified her.
Ooh, debating. Yeah, that's the ultimate test of spontaneous speaking, isn't it? Fast-paced, unpredictable, you have to think on your feet.
Exactly. She put it perfectly. She said, in a debate, you just can't translate in your head. You can't sit there carefully planning out perfect sentences. You have to react now. You have to challenge what someone just said, defend your point, counter-argue immediately. Her mind just froze up completely in those initial attempts.
I can imagine.
She said she knew the words, she knew the philosophical arguments, but she just couldn't get them out smoothly or quickly enough. Grammatically, maybe her sentences were okay if you analyze them later, but in the moment, no natural rhythm, her ideas weren't linked together well, just lots of hesitation and awkwardness.
So how did she get past that deer in headlights feeling? How did she find her spontaneous voice?
Her philosophy professor gave her what turned out to be the key piece of advice. He told her something like, Anya, your logical brain works beautifully in English when you write. You get the concepts. Now you need the language itself to feel natural, to flow more automatically. Stop aiming for perfectly correct sentences in the heat of the moment. Aim for effective arguments instead. And the best way to get there, you need to start thinking in English.
Start thinking in English. Okay, that sounds profound, maybe a bit intimidating. How do you actually do that? It feels like such a big mental switch to flip.
She got really deliberate about it, almost like training a new mental muscle. Instead of automatically forming her thoughts in German and then going through that translation step, she forced herself to start doing her internal monologue in English. She'd mentally narrate her day. Okay, now I'm walking to the library. She'd argue internally about news headlines she read, plan imaginary conversations, even draft emails or simple to-do lists in her head, all in English.
Wow, so really forcing that internal shift.
Yes. And specifically for the debating practice, instead of trying to write out full speeches beforehand, she started using mind maps. Just keywords, core phrases, maybe little symbols, all in English. This forced her to generate the connecting language, the full sentences, the linking phrases spontaneously on the fly, using the mind map as just a trigger.
That mind map approach sounds brilliant. It bypasses that urge to prescript everything and forces the spontaneity muscle to work.
It was incredibly effective for her. She also joined Toastmasters, specifically for their impromptu speaking section. I think it's called Table Topics.
Right, where they give you a random topic and you just have to talk for a minute or two.
Exactly. No preparation time at all.
Oh my gosh, that sounds utterly terrifying.
She said it absolutely was, especially at first. But she also found it incredibly freeing over time. She learned how to use natural filler words. Well, I mean, actually not just out of panic, but strategically, to buy herself a split second of thinking time, just like native speakers naturally do. She practiced paraphrasing quickly when she couldn't immediately grab the perfect word she wanted. She learned useful stock phrases like, that's an interesting question, to give herself a moment to organize her thoughts before launching in. And she really focused consciously on using those linking words and phrases. Therefore, however, in addition, on the other hand, to make sure her spontaneous arguments still had logical flow and structure.
So what was the ultimate result of all this focus on thinking in English, the mind maps, the terrifying impromptu practice?
Slowly but surely, her entire internal process shifted. That friction, that delay caused by mental translation, it just started to fade away. Her responses in debates became much quicker, more sophisticated, and they just sounded more natural and confident. She found she could genuinely express her complex philosophical ideas spontaneously, effectively, not just correctly after the fact. And successfully joining the debate society, feeling comfortable there, was a direct result of making that internal shift, moving towards thinking and speaking on the fly, and letting go of the need for prepackaged perfection.
Anya's story really hits home that the C1 leap, especially in speaking, is often an internal one, isn't it? It's about changing how you think in the language. So, building on that, what are some concrete speaking strategies listeners can use to build that kind of fluency, coherence, and spontaneity?
Okay, yeah, lots of good practical stuff came out of the sources. Building that core fluency and coherence is huge. We've talked about thinking in English, make that a conscious daily practice, even if it's just for a few minutes narrating your thoughts. When you do have to prepare for a talk or presentation, try using mind maps or simple bullet points, not full scripts. Force yourself to generate the actual language spontaneously in the moment.
Right. Resist the urge to write it all out.
Exactly. Master those discourse markers and cohesive devices, words like however, furthermore, in contrast, as a result. Know them, but more importantly, use them actively to make your speech flow smoothly and logically. Practice paraphrasing and circumlocution, learning how to talk around a word or concept when you can't immediately recall the precise term. It's a vital skill. And surprisingly effective is storytelling practice. Just practice telling simple anecdotes, summarizing a book or movie plot out loud. It naturally encourages you to use more descriptive language and vary your sentence structures, making your speech sound much less robotic and more engaging.
All things that make you sound more, well, human and less like you're reciting something memorized. What about actively boosting your vocabulary and grammar range when you speak, making sure you're using all the language you know?
Yeah, that's essential for sounding truly C1. You absolutely have to move beyond just passively recognizing advanced words, idioms, complex structures. You need to actively use them consciously, try to deploy them in your conversations. Make an effort to vary your sentence structures. Don't get stuck in simple subject-verb-object patterns all the time.
Yeah.
Experiment with using more complex forms when they're appropriate things like inversions, never have I seen.
I like
Conditionals, if I had known.
Yeah.
Maybe the passive voice where it fits naturally. Get comfortable using common phrasal verbs and collocations, those combinations of words that just naturally go together and sound right to native speakers. Make progress, take advantage of, come up with. And just like with listening, recycle language. Pay attention when you hear native speakers use a great phrase or a particularly effective way of explaining something. Note it down, and then deliberately try to incorporate it into your own speech soon after. Turn that passive knowledge into active use.
So much about C1 really boils down to that, doesn't it? Taking what you know passively and forcing yourself to make it active, to actually use it. And pronunciation and intonation, how much do they matter? How you say things?
Oh, they matter hugely. Absolutely critical for how you come across, how easily people understand you, and frankly, how sophisticated you sound. You need to focus on English rhythm and stress. English is a stress-timed language, which is very different from many other languages. Getting that stress pattern right is maybe the single biggest key to sounding natural.
Okay.
Understand and practice connected speech, how words naturally link together, sounds get dropped or changed in the flow of conversation, gonna, wanna, shoulda. Use intonation consciously, the rise and fall of your voice to show meaning, emotion, emphasis. Is it a question? Are you excited? Are you doubtful? Intonation carries so much that, and this is the tough one, you really must record yourself speaking.
Ugh, nobody likes listening back to themselves.
I know, it takes courage, but it is absolutely invaluable feedback. Listen back critically. Where do you hesitate awkwardly? What parts sound unclear or unnatural? Where does your intonation sound flat?
Painful but necessary.
Exactly. And don't be shy about asking for specific feedback on your pronunciation and intonation from trusted native speakers, teachers, or advanced peers. That combination of self-correction from listening to yourself, plus getting targeted external feedback, creates a vital improvement loop.
And the most fundamental advice for improving speaking, the non-negotiable.
Practice. Simple as that. It's non-negotiable. You absolutely have to seek out or create opportunities to actually talk with native speakers or other advanced learners. Join discussion groups. Find a debate club if you're brave like Anya. Find language exchange partners online or in person. Practice arguing spontaneously about topics you care about. Role-play different situations you might realistically encounter a job interview, making a complaint, explaining a complex process, even just explaining things out loud to yourself, or summarizing an article or a talk you just heard. It sounds basic, but honestly, the more you speak, the more fluent, confident, and automatic it becomes. There's no shortcut for mileage.
That feels like the bedrock truth, doesn't it? Just putting in the hours speaking. Do you have one more story for us, maybe illustrating a different kind of speaking challenge at C1? Perhaps something less about the mechanics of language and more about, I don't know, personality or confidence.
Definitely. Let's talk about Taibo. He's an entrepreneur originally from South Africa, living and working in London. Excellent written English, really sharp business acumen. But he described himself as naturally quite shy, and he was extremely self-conscious about his South African accent. He worried constantly that it made him difficult to understand or that it sounded somehow less professional in that London business environment. Networking events were apparently pure torture for him.
Oh, I can totally see how being self-conscious about your accent could be a massive barrier, especially in something like networking, where first impressions and spontaneous conversation are everything.
It can be a complete confidence killer, absolutely. It can really shut down connection. Taibo's breakthrough actually came after a particularly bad networking night where he felt he just completely failed to connect with anyone meaningful. He was talking to a mentor afterwards, feeling pretty down, and the mentor gave him some incredibly insightful and ultimately empowering advice. He said something like, Taibo, look, your ideas are brilliant. Your business sense is sharp. Your accent, that's part of who you are. It's unique. It makes you memorable. It makes you interesting. Think of it as a strength, not a weakness. People ultimately want to connect with someone real, someone authentic, not some perfectly polished robot speaker who sounds like everyone else.
Yeah.
Stop trying so hard to sound like someone you're not. Focus instead on showing your genuine interest in other people and sharing your own great ideas authentically, even if a few words aren't perfectly pronounced according to some imaginary standard.
Wow. That completely reframes it, doesn't it? Shifting the goal from sounding perfect to being real and connecting. That must have been incredibly liberating to hear.
He said it absolutely was. It gave him permission to stop chasing an impossible ideal. So he consciously changed his internal goal. It wasn't about achieving perfect pronunciation anymore. It was simply about connecting with people authentically. He started paying really close attention to how his British and American colleagues actually use small talk in natural settings, focusing on the rhythm, the typical phrases, the back-and-forth learning by observing real interactions, not from a textbook list.
Okay.
He recorded himself practicing his business pitch, not just to check the script or the grammar, but specifically to listen for where he sounded stiff or unnatural, or where his personality wasn't coming through. He actively worked on varying his intonation more, trying to sound more enthusiastic when he was excited about an idea or more curious when asking questions, really working on projecting his authentic self through the language.
So he was deliberately working on making the language a vehicle for his actual personality, not just a tool for conveying information perfectly.
Exactly. And he pushed himself way out of his comfort zone. He joined an entrepreneurs networking group. He forced himself to go to industry events he'd previously avoided. He even volunteered for something that required talking to lots of different people. He started setting small, manageable goals for each event. Like, okay, tonight I'm just going to initiate 3 conversations no matter how nervous I feel. And crucially, during those conversations, his primary focus shifted. It became less about monitoring his own speech and more about listening attentively to the other person, asking good follow-up questions, showing genuine interest, and sharing relevant points about himself and his business, accepting that the words might not be perfectly polished every single time.
And how did that shift focusing on connection over perfection impact his speaking and his confidence?
His confidence just soared. He realized that while clarity obviously matters, his relentless pursuit of some unattainable perfect accent was actually the very thing stopping him from opening up, being himself, and making those connections. And ironically, his fluency improved massively simply because he was having more real, lower-pressure conversations where the focus was on genuine interaction. His accent just became part of his professional identity, part of his brand, you could say. And people responded incredibly well to his genuine interest, his enthusiasm, and his strong ideas. Taibo's story is such a powerful example that C1 speaking ultimately is about finding and confidently using your authentic voice to genuinely connect with other human beings.
These stories, Kenji, overcoming the accent barrier and spontaneous listening, Sophia mastering her highly specialized fields of communication, Anya finding her spontaneous voice by thinking in English, and Taibo learning to connect authentically by embracing his own voice, they paint such a rich, multifaceted picture of what C1 mastery really involves, don't they?
They really do.
Mm.
And they absolutely underscore how listening and speaking, especially at this advanced level, aren't these separate skills living in little isolated boxes.
Not at all. They're deeply, fundamentally interconnected. You can't really separate them. They constantly feed and reinforce each other. All that deliberate, active listening we talked about earlier, absorbing the natural rhythms, the advanced vocabulary, the authentic pronunciation, the way native speakers use idioms, that's the vital input, the fuel that directly feeds your speaking ability.
And conversely, when you actively practice speaking, when you push yourself to produce more complex, natural-sounding language, it inevitably makes you much more sensitive to the nuances of spoken English when you listen. It sharpens your listening ear because you're trying to produce those same sounds and structures yourself.
It's this incredibly powerful, positive feedback loop, isn't it? A real virtuous cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can think of every single conversation you have as a mini feedback loop happening in real time. You speak, you observe how people react, you listen carefully to their response, which is more input. That constant back and forth is absolutely golden for helping you identify exactly where you need to focus your efforts, both in listening and speaking.
Yeah.
For instance, if you consistently find yourself struggling to follow speakers with a particular accent, well, there's a clear listening target for you. If you repeatedly find yourself stumbling and unable to clearly explain a certain type of concept, that highlights a specific vocabulary gap or maybe a structural weakness you need to work on for your speaking.
So it's really about consciously leaning into that synergy. When you're listening to something, maybe actively ask yourself, okay, how would I express that same idea? And when you're speaking, really truly listen to how others respond, not just waiting for your turn to talk again.
Precisely. It's this continuous cycle. Input, output, reflection, refinement. Input, output, reflection, refinement. Over and over. Now, reaching C1 is a massive achievement, but as we said, it's incredibly common to hit those plateaus at this level where progress feels frustratingly slow, maybe even non-existent for a while. What advice came up in the sources for navigating that common experience?
Yeah, plateaus seem pretty much inevitable at advanced levels. The absolute key seems to be staying proactive and being willing to change your approach when something isn't working anymore. Instead of having a vague goal like improve my English, the advice is to set small, specific, and most importantly, achievable micro goals.
Okay, like what?
For example, instead of get better at accents, maybe set a goal like this week I'm going to listen to at least one 30-minute podcast episode featuring an Australian speaker. Or instead of improve my vocabulary, maybe this month I will consciously try to use 5 new advanced phrasal verbs I learned in conversations.
Breaking it down into manageable chunks. Micro goals. I like that.
Exactly. It makes the big, potentially overwhelming goal feel much less daunting. And related to that, celebrate those small wins. Actually acknowledge and give yourself credit for every little bit of progress, no matter how minor it might feel in the grand scheme of things. And, crucially, try to fundamentally change how you view mistakes. They aren't failures. They aren't signs you're not good enough. They are simply data points.
Data points, yeah.
Data showing you exactly where you need to focus your learning next. So, analyze them without judgment. Figure out why you made that particular mistake. Was it pronunciation, grammar, word choice? And learn from it. And if your current study routine just feels stale and boring, mix things up. Try a completely new type of material. Find a different practice partner. Experiment with a totally different learning exercise or technique.
Variety is definitely key to breaking out of a learning rut.
It really is. And maybe, ultimately, the most important piece of advice for pushing through a plateau is to reconnect with your core motivation. Remind yourself why you embarked on this journey in the first place. Why do you want this high level of English proficiency? What specific doors will it open for you? What opportunities will it create? What connections will it allow you to make? That underlying purpose, that why, is your most powerful fuel when the going gets tough and progress feels slow.
That's all really solid, practical advice for staying the course when things get challenging. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive today, it's worth remembering that mastering C1 listening and speaking is truly a transformative journey. It goes so far beyond just achieving grammatical correctness or ticking off vocabulary lists. It's really about unlocking your own unique voice in English. It's about gaining the confidence to connect with people and complex ideas on a much deeper level. It's about being able to handle intricate conversations with ease, express your nuanced thoughts clearly and persuasively, and understand all those subtle, unspoken layers that make human communication so rich and fascinating. It's that shift from simply conveying information to truly engaging, understanding, and importantly, being understood authentically.
And that journey, the path to becoming a truly fluent, nuanced, sophisticated user of English, it definitely takes ongoing immersion in the language, deliberate, focused practice on specific skills, and a consistent willingness to keep pushing your comfort zone again and again, even when it feels difficult or awkward. But as the stories we share today, Kanji, Sophia, Anya, Taibo, clearly demonstrate, with the right strategies, consistent hard work, and maybe most importantly, the right mindset, you really can take your English listening and speaking skills to incredible new levels of mastery.
Ultimately, reaching this level is about equipping yourself not just to communicate, but to allow your unique perspective, your unique voice to be heard, to be understood, and potentially to make a real impact across the globe. Definitely something to think about as you continue on your own English learning journey. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.